I'm delighted to welcome you all to this, the second in a series of 7 special events to celebrate UK-Israel Business 70th anniversary. In this current environment, it's clear we're at an inflection point, especially in the digital landscape. And I can think of no better people than to make sense of this for us all than Sir Martin Sorrell and Oren Kaniel, who we hope today will be able to explain to us what they feel are the challenges and the opportunities in this complex world. Normally, we pre-record these events, but with Sir Martin and Oren, we felt there was no better way to do this than to do it live today. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to James Ashton, who is kindly moderating this session. Thank you, James.
Thanks so much, Danny. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's good to be here at this event taking place as part of the 7 for 70 series for UK Israel business. My latest book, The 9 Types of Leader, features a chapter on founders, and we have 2 great examples of the breed, speaking today about the digital economy, about leading in unpredictable times, and some learnings from their careers so far. Sir Martin Sorrell is one of the UK's most recognisable business leaders. He leads S4C Capital. It's a digital advertising and marketing services company established in 2018. Clients include BMW, Beyond Meat, Google, and Shopify. And for 33 years, Sir Martin was CEO of WPP, building it from a £1 million shell company in 1985 into the world's largest advertising and marketing group. As Danny said, joining Sir Martin is Oren Kaniel. He's CEO and co-founder of AppsFlyer, a leading attribution platform that helps brands measure the effectiveness of their mobile marketing spend. Customers at AppsFlyer include Walmart, Nike, HBO, and Tencent. It's also attracted an impressive array of backers since it was set up in 2011, including Salesforce, General Atlantic, and Deutsche Telekom. Welcome to you both. Very brief housekeeping. Please submit your questions via the Q&A function. Do let us know who you are and what you do. I'll get through as many as I can before handing back to Danny just before 12 o'clock. You're also advised to watch this webinar in full screen for the best quality so you can see us up close and personal. You will have noticed by now the live transcription service is also on. You can switch that off if that's not for you. Let me get into questions. First of all, Sir Martin, explosive growth for the digital economy during the pandemic. Where do we go from here as lockdowns ease? Do we keep seeing more of the same? You're on mute, Sir Martin.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, absolutely.
Okay, you have all this paraphernalia around me. We should have just done it on Zoom. Anyway, so where are we? Good to be with you, James. Good to be with you, Oren. Where are we? Well, I think we're on the cusp. I describe it as a coiled spring, James. I think the consumer has been constrained and has been building savings. You know, look at the UK, for example. You look at the US. You look at most of the G7 economies. Certainly, there've been significant saving of all the fiscal and monetary stimulus. We're on the cusp maybe of another 1.9 trillion. These numbers are huge in the context of the US economy. So I think the consumer's like a coiled spring, and I think companies are like a coiled spring. I mean, certainly our numbers last year, we were budgeting for S4 30% like-for-like growth. I'm talking about gross margin, gross profit growth, net revenue growth. The market's expecting, as a result of COVID, for that figure to be 15 to 20%. We report later this month, our year last year. But you know that in Q3 of last year, we were up 23% and accelerating into Q4 and actually into the start of 2021 too. So I would expect from Q2 of this year, a very strong growth in global GDP, and digital advertising and digital transformation is strongly correlated to GDP growth. So GDP this year, Goldman, Morgan Stanley are all forecasting about 5 to 6%. Rishi Sunak yesterday said for the UK economy about 4 to 5%, slightly less because the government, God bless them here, didn't handle the lockdown too well. The vaccination program has gone very well, but they didn't handle that. So a bit slower out of the traps this year. But next year, we'll get again, GDP growth from Goldman, Morgan Stanley, probably 4 to 5%. So we haven't seen GDP growth at these levels, James, since the 1980s, when we had very much more significant inflation. So I am extremely bullish on the real economy and its impact on the digital economy. The correlation is very strong for G7 and G20 countries between digital advertising growth and GDP growth. It's very similar to what we saw when I was at Saatchi's in the 1980s in the UK, when total advertising growth was correlated to GDP growth, traditional advertising. That correlation is broken and now be reestablished by that. The other thing that will drive this, obviously, is the growth of 5G over time. And these networks will just stimulate greater growth for Oren's business and for our business. So
never mind the roaring 20s, we're going back to the 80s if we're lucky.
Well, there's an interesting parallels. If you ask me what I'm worried about, I'm very bullish, as you can hear, on 21 and 22. What I worry about is maybe what will happen in 23 and beyond. I mean, we saw that a little bit in the budget yesterday with the Chancellor. I mean, what is going to happen in 23 when corporation tax rises? We have the super deductions to counterbalance it and a number of other measures. But in a way, you saw in the budget yesterday the conflict between, well, three things. Firstly, making sure that people were protected or continue to be protected through COVID-19. Secondly, rebalancing public finances. And thirdly, post-Brexit, what do we do about stimulating the UK economy? I call it Singapore on Thames or Singapore on steroids. What are we going to do to maintain that? So the contradictions or the conflicts were quite apparent yesterday too.
Oren, let me bring you in. Clearly, as Martin says, it's been a great time to be in digital. You have seen a lot of good growth, and I think the outlook is good for 2021. But what's been the big challenge as to how you've run AppsFlyer during this time?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I think that this is a very special time in the history, and I think that we will all look at this time 5, 10, 20 years from today, and we will remember and hope that we will remember that for the good. Because I think that there are a lot of challenges that are happening in the world and the economy and advertising and digitalization. And I think that as a society, as people of this world, we will manage to build something good out of it. I thought that when the pandemic hit it, I thought and I hoped that there will be more collaboration across the world, countries, nations, companies, because this is a really, truly global thing. I think that, I don't remember something that is so global, and we have, all of us, we have something in common. So if you go to anywhere in the world today, we all have the same kind of experience. So I think that we should know everybody a little bit better. So I hope that the collaboration didn't really happen as far as I thought, but I hope that once we go out of it, we will appreciate that a little bit more when we meet each other, no matter where and no matter who, because we experience something together as people. Specifically for the digitalization, I think that what happened last year is just absolutely amazing in terms of digitalization. I think that the transformation that happened the last year is equivalent to 5 years, even more. And as a truly global company, we serve Asia and Africa, and also the US and Europe. And there are big differences between these markets. So if in Asia, people are doing everything with a mobile device, actually, according to a research that we did with our data, we saw that the lifetime value per device or per user in Asia actually equivalent to the one in the US. Now, think about it, GDP per person in Asia and the US is a very big difference, but in Asia, they do everything with a mobile device, whether it's payments and everything else. So in the US, you have 10 different credit cards to pay, and you have desktop and you have all that. And in Asia, you do everything with a mobile device. And I think that the transformation actually more it happened already in Asia and developing countries, and developed countries and Western countries. I think that this is where we see a tremendous jump. I can tell you, I'm not going to say name, but some really big brands considered to be really innovative, just jumping on this mobile transformation or revolution just now. So they didn't really invest in mobile up until now, and now they really have to. So I think that this is also a blessing for them, because if they would just continue to sleep and just continue to do the old ways, they would go out of business, for like so many other companies that didn't realize that everything changes.
And surely a blessing for you as well, Oren, the more people that are dealing in mobile. Was there anything you had to do differently? Anything that was really tough over the last year? Because I guess, well, maybe AppsFlyer you're running in quite a devolved, remote way anyway. But were there any challenges? How did you overcome them?
You know, James, we will have to dedicate the whole session just for that. I don't know where to start. Starting from work from home, and I think that maybe, you know what, I'm just gonna mention a few. You know what, I'll mention the one thing that we all should learn from, that in the world and life and business, everything is going to change. Besides very, very basic elementary things that never going to change. And I think that companies that don't realize that everything is going to change and define to themselves what's never going to change for them, eventually will go out of business. And for us, we identified very simple, stupid and simple things that never going to change for us. And this is something that guided us in the last couple of years. One of them is customers. So guess what? In 20 years, we hope that we're still going to have customers. So this is the most important thing. Security and privacy. So privacy is the thing. And this is something that we invested heavily in the last couple of years. And I think that this is the best prediction that we can have into the future, because it's going to stay. Security and privacy is going to stay 5, 10, 20 years from today. And I think that companies must invest heavily in these areas. Enabling innovation. I think that everything is about innovation and how we can enable innovation with our customers, partners, and the entire ecosystem. And data accuracy, because for us, customers are relying on our data and analytics to make significant decisions. So obviously, these are the things that are never going to change for us. And I think that every business needs to define the things that are never going to change for them.
Okay, thank you. Martin, I can only, I mean, we could probably talk for the full hour about, how your life has changed, and you probably haven't got on quite as many planes this year. But I would like to ask.
I've enjoyed that, James. I've terrible thing to say, because COVID has been such a disaster. But I have to say that from a personal point of view, not getting into a hotel room at 11 o'clock at night and waking up at 3 o'clock to take a call has been a revelation. And actually, a large number of people that I talk to share that view. And my patterns, work from home. Oren said about work from home. Our people are not even digital first; they're digital natives. Most of our 4,400 people come in 31 countries from the platforms. They come from Google and Facebook and Yahoo and Salesforce. They don't come from the agency holding company. So working from home was first nature to them. It wasn't even second nature. Great changes. I just want to pick up on one thing Oren said. Of a lot that were of interest, but the fragmentation point that he referred to. And I think this is, we may talk about the Abraham Accords and what happened under the Trump administration with Jared Kushner and countries in the Middle East. But my view, the biggest worry that I worry about, obviously, inequality, climate change, the negative impacts of globalization, Brexit, and everything. But my biggest worry from a S4 point of view, as we expand our business in Asia, we're 70% North and South America, 20% Western Europe, and 10% Asia Pacific, and I want it to be 40-20-40. My biggest worry is the US-China relationship. China will be the biggest economy in 2028. Every single one of our clients, our biggest client is Google. Our second biggest client is a well-known telecoms company. I can't mention its name because we have an NDA, but you can imagine it's one of the most valuable, if not the most valuable companies on the planet. BMW, Mini, Mondelez, Facebook, those would be our top 5. Every one of them, certainly the non-platform companies, you'd have to include Tencent, Alibaba, and TikTok, have China as a major market. And even now in COVID, their numbers are being driven, the car manufacturers, for example, are being driven by the post-COVID or COVID recovery that we're seeing in Asia first. But the fragmentation issue, the tension between, if you look at Blinken's speech, Biden's speech, first policy speeches, China is described as the biggest competitor. This fragmentation, which Oren mentioned in the context of COVID, the fact is it did affect everybody unequally. It affected the poorer and less resourced more, and we didn't work together. Even with the vaccine programs, look at the differential Israel, stellar implementation, UK, close to stellar. You look at what the US finally getting its act together, but this fragmentation and competitiveness, it's really deglobalization. And a lot of our clients are starting to look at things in a much more local way. You hear a lot more of that. And this is ironic or paradoxical because technology enables you to bring things together much more effectively. So we do what we call personalization at scale. Our Holy Trinity model, forgive me for mentioning that on a UK-Israel webinar, but our Holy Trinity model is based on first-party data, that is own data, which is highly topical today because of Google's announcement on privacy yesterday, which we can get into. But first-party data driving the creation of personalized content at scale. So for a Netflix, we might produce 1.6 million different executions for one of their creative executions for one of their series, and then pumping that out digitally and seeing what the reaction is in real time. That is a much more personalized system. It can be controlled centrally, but countries are fragmenting, and politically we're fragmenting. Here in the UK, as you well know, James, what's the big issue? Big issue is Scottish devolution or Irish devolution, the uniting of Northern and Southern Ireland, or even Welsh devolution. We may well go back to the England of the 1300s, and it won't be a United Kingdom. So the fragmentation point that Oren mentioned, I think, is really a fundamental point. Are we going to cooperate? Are we going to deal with issues together? Or are we going to see greater confrontation? And trying to run a business in the way we are globally in 31 countries, we probably won't go beyond about 35 countries. China and India become extremely important for us. And China is a real, navigating China is going to be a real issue.
It's very interesting that actually the digital progress is a given. Actually, it could be the political fragmentation that that slows that down. I want to touch a little bit, seeing as we are a UK-Israel business, a little bit on ecosystems and the markets that we know best. Israel, I think, more startups per capita than any other country. UK, despite all of its troubles over the last couple of years and the distraction of Brexit, $15 billion of investment going into UK tech firms last year. Oren, it seems that there's so many great things going on, but the challenge often is scaling up these great startups. Is that getting easier to do, you think?
So I'll start with the direct answer. The answer is yes, and I think that you can just see how many significant companies are going out of Israel. So if you would, let's say a couple of years ago, the acquisition of Waze, the value of $1 billion, kind of sounds like a small joke, but it was one of the largest, most inspiring acquisitions that happened back in 2013. So every step along the way, you allow the entire ecosystem to dream bigger. Now, as Shimon Peres said, there is no room for small dreams. Now, the problem is that your dreams are limited by your reality. because if you don't have enough money for food and family and your kids, your dream is to have enough money to support your family. So it means that you need to take steps in order to improve your reality. And the same goes with startups. So once you have this kind of acquisition like Waze, and we have few kind of really milestones in Israel. So we prove to ourselves as entrepreneurs, as service providers, as law firms and lawyers and investors, that something like that is doable. Now you need to take that to the next step. And I think that the entire industry is kind of supporting this kind of scale. It means talent, marketing, sales, going global from day one. So it's no longer let's build cool technology and then sell it to Apple. So next to us there is a big building of Apple, result of acquisition of 4 companies. The 4 companies mostly had technology, like great technology, and how do you productize this kind of technology? And I think that this is something that changed in the last couple of years, specifically in the last 5 years. And also, I think that we proved to ourselves that we can have great products, great user experience, although we mostly engineers, and I'm an engineer myself, but I think that understanding that user experience and not only the value, but how you feel about using a specific product is something that is becoming very common here. So significant change. And I think that someone listed tens of unicorns only in Israel. This is unparalleled. Only in the last year, it's completely.
Yeah, and I suppose as AppsFlyer now is worth at least twice Waze at point of sale. So you can look down on that a little bit or look back at that. So I suppose you're saying there's something about building on what went before, about the confidence of founders, about the financiers being open to this as well. Martin, I'm curious about your view, the sense about what a mid-sized market, as we must think of UK and Israel as. The thing with tech, it was always, well, how do we create our own Google? But I think the debate is a bit more sophisticated now. Certainly in the UK, it's not about 1 or 2 huge companies. It's about quite a wide environment, if you like. You know, we're good at fintech, we're good at health tech, we're good at all these other things. What should the aspiration be, do you think?
Well, I don't think we are. I mean, the interesting thing about yesterday, the Chancellor's statement was that the third leg of the statement, one was protecting people with COVID, second was trying to rebalance the finances with corporate tax increases and super tax deductions. And the third part was sort of Singapore on steroids, or Singapore on Thames, by trying to stimulate investment. Free ports, 8 free ports, the restructuring bank, leveling up the rest of the country. And then this really interesting report that was coincident with the budget by Lord Hill, which is looking at trying to stimulate, and we're a good example of this, S4 Capital, and we now have a market cap of about $3.5 billion after 2.5 years. We're owner controlled. Myself and a number of other entrepreneurs who we brought into the company on the content side of the business and the data analytics and digital media side of the business own about 40-45% of the company. There is no separation of ownership and control. And what Lord Hill is doing is recommending that we have a standard listing on the London Stock Exchange, which means we're not an index stock, although we actually are in the MSCI. We're about 158 in the FTSE now. Now, it means that if we became premium listed, we would be indexed. Now, what Lord Hill is recommending is that fintech, green, and more importantly, high-tech companies, digitally oriented companies like ours, should, even with a standard listing, become eligible for index weighting, and then being given the opportunity to move to premium listing with a dual class structure. So I have a control share, and owners, in my view, owner-managed companies. Now, let me give you an example. Rupert Murdoch, was often criticized by virtue of the fact that by equity, the family had 10%, but they had 40% of the voting rights.
Sure.
I think Rupert has demonstrated a good example over a long period of time that owner-managed companies where there is no split between ownership and control, between ownership and management, they are better. And founder owners of tech companies, like the unicorns that Oren referred to, if they go public, like to retain control. We see it with Apple, we see it with Google, we see it with Facebook, we see it with a host of tech companies. And what Lord Hill is doing, and I hope the FCA and the city grandees will approve of his recommendations, is giving owner-managed companies for the first time the opportunity to really build their business. I mean, the two biggest examples, I guess, of the dual class structure in the UK are ourselves and the Hut Group, which is probably about number 73 in the FTSE. And we're looking...
If it was allowed to be in there, Martin.
Sorry?
If the Hut Group was allowed to be in the FTSE, but of course it isn't.
Yeah, yes, but it's really interesting that under these recommendations, I guess in time it could choose to do so. I mean, one of the recommendations is that you become a premium listed company, you can retain your owner-controlled structure for 5 years and then surrender it. So that's one of the routes. Or you could even stay as a standard listing company, as we are, and negotiate, if you like, index status. So I think what's happening in the UK, and Oren said, I mean, if you look at the number of unicorns per country, not per head, as he said, I think the US is number one, I think the UK is number two, and I think Israel is number three, and Holland is number four. So it is, I mean, the UK has driven tech companies, but FTSE 100, James, is very backwards looking. It's very financially orientated, and it's very old economy orientated. I mean, if somebody wants to invest in a royalty on digital growth, S4 Capital, and there are very few others. There are very few companies that are not ad tech or martech, that are not tech driven, because we're not an ad tech or martech company. We're part of the service layer. We provide services to companies in analyzing the platforms, the hardware companies, and the software companies.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Oren. I want to go back to the beginning. If we're talking about owner operators, we need to know about how things began. You picked up your first iPhone. It was 2010. You were on an exchange program to Wharton, and from there, great opportunity came, and you that was the initial idea for AppsFlyer. What I'm curious about is the iPhone had been out a couple of years then, and I guess there were other would-be entrepreneurs who, even before you, picked up the phone and went, "This is fantastic." So I'm interested in what you thought at that time, but then why you think you're the one that brought this forward and created the business that you have done.
Yeah. So back in the days, I was a BlackBerry user. I thought that BlackBerry is the thing. And I thought that there is no chance that Apple could build something like that. I was completely wrong, obviously. Back in these years, the iPhone was launched in 2007, store in 2008. Obviously, I was ignoring it. And it was easy to ignore in Israel because you couldn't really buy an iPhone. So go figure, in the startup nation, you cannot buy this kind of innovation. This is kind of funny. And we kind of telling the government, come on, I mean, you need to open the gates for innovation, so many things. And I think that there are so many regulations around that. I mean, only now Israel is allowing Tesla to import cars. So there are no Teslas on the roads. Maybe it's going to change during the year. And I don't think that this is more on the consumer side. I think that this is more on the innovation side, because these kind of innovations are kind of fueling new innovations. So the first iPhone legally landed in Israel in the end of 2010. So we had like almost 4 years of gap between a device that actually changed the world in so many levels until it landed in the hands of people here. So I was in the US, and I was just, I bought it on Craigslist, like a used iPhone, and I couldn't go to sleep. I was just really shocked by how much this device is going to change about everything. And And then I was working for a small VC. I saw that app developers could not measure. My personal background is engineering, so the way I'm making decisions is all logical. I needs to make sense, and it just didn't make sense to me how companies are spending so much money and effort about stuff that they cannot measure and how they make decisions on the spendings and stuff like that. It just didn't make sense to me. And I thought to myself, as an outsider, you have a curse. If you are an insider, you're very limited by the industry that you operate in. And we came as an outsider and we built something that is very, very different. We thought about, okay, marketer, advertiser, which companies are representing their interests, because there's this kind of a wild west of companies with so many conflict of interests. And I still don't understand it after 10 years in the industry. But what we thought is, okay, what if we take the advertiser, the buyer side, the ones that want to pay less and get more, because this is inherited buyers and sellers. The sellers want to get more and do less, and this is nature of business. But if we build a company and technology that will serve the buyer, that will serve the advertiser and the marketer in the ecosystem, we probably can build something that is very meaningful. And I think that the staying independent and staying unbiased is something that so powerful and enabled us to grow. And I think that in the last year, it kind of became even much more meaningful in the ecosystem.
Martin, I think you set up WPP at about the age of 40, and going back before that, I paraphrase, I think it was your dad that said, find an industry, find a company and stick to it. I'm interested if it's easier second time around. You said in a recent interview that founding is a bit like giving birth for a man, or the nearest men can get to. Did you know where the gas and air was this time?
Did I know where what?
Where to find the gas and air?
Well, I've done it, I've had 3 lives, I guess. Sarch is the CFO, and then started WPP, as you say, or Warren Plastic Products, as you say, at the age of 40, which is what followed my dad's advice. S4 is different. We focused totally on growth. Maybe it was because I was 73 years old when I left WPP and was a little weary of struggling with that top line growth. James, it sort of peaked in 2016, 17, was flat, and it was difficult to get that growth. So, and I think total shareholder return, coming back to owner-managed companies, the drivers of it are slightly different in terms of their weighting now to when I was at Sarch's or at WPP. It used to be 50% roughly on top-line growth, that's like-for-like growth, and 50% on margin. I think today it's very much 75% on top-line growth and 25% on margin. That's what drives total shareholder return. Even in the long term, you have to have margins, you have to have profitability. Our margins are 20% plus, even after central costs, and our operating practices around content and data and analytics and digital media do well in excess of 20%. So strong margins, but top line growth. I think we would sacrifice 100 basis points of margin for 100 basis points of top line growth. So when we did that, and when we launched S4, I was really focused. I believe we were averagely intelligent. I actually think we're better than that, but let's say we're averagely intelligent. And pushing on an open door was really important. So that's why we chose the 3 areas really of first-party data, digital advertising content, and digital media. And they're growing, as I said, they're more than 50% of the media market. The addressable market for us is 500 to 550 billion in media, of which more than half for the first time is digital media. The 500 billion in marketing services like PR and market research. And then finally about 700 billion, 800 billion in trade budgets. So it's about a 1.7, 1.8 trillion addressable market. And it's growing this year. The media piece of it will grow by 20%. And it's forecast to be 70% by 2024. So pushing on an open door, going back to what Oren said about the iPhone and its facility and abilities and adaptability and the science behind it and the applications behind it, it's the same thing in a way. What we've done is just pick out the growth. And we have none of the analog. I mean, the good news about S4, it was a clean sheet of paper, so we had none of the analog albatrosses around our neck. The bad news, of course, is we don't have history, we don't have brand, so we had to create, we became a dollar and sterling unicorn in our first full year last year, and we became a double dollar and sterling unicorn this year. So we've seen very rapid growth, and we're not fighting. We're dealing, and I think it's a really important point, we're dealing with clients and people. 55% of our revenues come from tech companies. We're dealing with companies that look at the sky rather than looking at their boots. It's a strange way of putting it, I know, but mentally, the companies we deal with tend to be expansionists. Nothing is impossible, rather than, the model pre-COVID was you grew your top line by 2 or 3 or 4%. You didn't have much inflation, and therefore you had very little pricing power. So you cut your costs and you bought your stock back, and that generated 0 to 5% EPS growth or 5 to 10% growth. Average life of a CEO of a listed company, as you know, James, is about 5 years. The average life of a company in the FTSE or the S&P 500 is about 17 years, according to McKinsey. So, this made people very focused on the short term. And that's why I fundamentally believe that owner-driven companies are ultimately going to be much more successful. If I was running an investment fund, that's what I'd look for. Management putting their money where their mouth is. And that's, to put it crudely. That, to my mind, is critical.
You've kind of covered these off, but I'll just go. We've got a couple of questions to wrap together. So Lawrence Melman was interested in your outlook for the legacy advertising holding companies. Obviously we haven't seen the breakups yet. We haven't seen the consolidation. So, where do they go when digital is moving at such a fast pace? And Phil Fraser may have got the answer from just listening to you. You've been there and done it, certainly more than these CEOs who last 5 years. What keeps driving you?
So on the first, Lawrence, hello, Lawrence, and good to hear from you. You know the answer as well as I do, Lawrence, which is breakup. Now, you said, James, that we have these rumors that one of the big PE firms had taken a close look at Publicis. I think that was more than rumor from what I hear. It's not something that Publicis likes to admit to for all sorts of political reasons, but I think it did take place. And I think that was that was the canary in the coal mine, if you like. That was the signal that private equity companies, as they started to look more at value rather than growth, and valuations have been stretched as yields have fallen, although yields are now starting to rise again. So I think the answer to Lawrence's question is breakup. You basically, as Lawrence and I both know, there are good parts to WPP and there are bad parts. So it's rather like the banks after the great financial crisis. If you could get rid of the bad bank and focus on the good bank, I was talking to somebody at Kantar today, and there are great parts of Kantar that Bain Capital, Bain Capital have done actually what they've answered Lawrence's question. WPP offloaded 60% of Kantar to Bain Capital, and they're starting to play with the pieces. They've just appointed a CEO. He's made some restructuring in the last few days, and they're starting to play with the growth parts, the good parts, and the bad parts. So I think breakup is the only way forward. And then what drives me?
Driving you, yeah.
Well, it's my mother's genes. So, and I don't like the idea of running a portfolio of interests. And thirdly, I have a point to prove, as Lawrence knows full well. So we're in the midst of proving a point.
Okay, I must let Oren prove a couple of points now. To come back to you, Oren, I'm curious. We talk a little bit about advertising and the industry that you're both in. And this very hot debate, privacy versus personalization. Clearly, Apple is going to make it easier to disable the code that tracks users' activity across all platforms. How does a company like you deal with that? And where do you think we go with this idea of privacy versus personalization? The consumer seems to be wising up a lot more to the value of their own data.
Yeah, so James, it's another question that we can take an entire session for. I'll try to give the highlights. I think that first of all, privacy is important. This is why it's one of our 4 pillars for the last couple of years. And I think that companies must innovate around privacy. That's one. Second thing is personalization, user experience and value to customers is very, very important. Now, the question is there a balance? And I want to give an example, because in the iOS 14, for example, for the first time, you can, if the iPhone camera is on with this. Or this device is listening to us right now or not? Do you know or not? So
this one, we're being recorded. We're being recorded.
If the microphone is on, you don't know. But now with iOS 14, you do know. So here you have a great example of much better privacy control and experience to the user. Now here you take an action that maximizing and benefiting user experience, personalization, value, trust, and privacy. Now, not all the decisions are on that scale, but I think that privacy and user experience and some kind of personalization, not because you as not the individual, I think that they can and should coexist. I think that we as a company in the last couple of years been working with the largest companies in the world, Apple, Google, Facebook, and the rest. The open web is not really open. And what happened in the last 10 years, you have World Wide Web, and you have, on top of it, you have platforms and walled gardens. And I'm not gonna get in debate whether it's a good thing or not, but this is reality. Now, the question is, how do you serve users that move from walled garden to walled garden to walled garden? And how do you serve app developers and value creation companies to build apps and services on top of these platforms and allow them to make decisions? And I think that what we've been doing in the last couple of years is working with these companies to connect it together and the World Wide Web with APIs, whether the APIs are open or just dedicated to measurement companies, in a way that you maximize the experience and the user privacy. And this is something that is doable. Now, if you look at what Apple, specifically here, they introduced the SKAd network. The SKAd network is just a way to communicate to the outside world with this. I mean, think about browsing. I mean, most of the browsing 10 years ago was in a browser, right? So the W3C had really meaningful impact on what is the internet and how open or not it is, and how open it is it to innovators and creators. But right now, the vast majority of consumers are not in the open web. So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered.
So Oren, can I ask you, take a bit of James's role, what do you think of Google's announcement yesterday on third-party cookies?
I think that it's something that we need to learn more. I read it. I think that this is a very high-level thing. I think that in general, but let's put that in general. I think that if there is a company that track you and everywhere you go on the web, their properties or not their properties in a user level, I don't think that anyone feel comfortable with this. I think that users need to have control, and I think that users need to be educated, and I think that users need to have choices, like real choices. And one of the things with choices is to give real choices. And this is one of the problems that specifically, and as I see it with iOS 14, but there is no doubt, that the market is going to aggregation in terms of measurement and in terms of personalization, because personalization doesn't need to be so personal based on what you just did last night. It's just noise in delivery.
But I think this is really important, because I think what Google and Apple, and obviously Oren is very dependent on both, as we are. What Apple and Google are doing are responding to the privacy concerns that consumers have. I mean, in Google's blog yesterday, they quoted Pew Research, which said, I think 80% of consumers are worried about privacy or issues around it. But what they're doing, what it will end up being, and Oren mentioned this, is that we'll end up with first-party data that is data owned by clients. So we're quite clear. I mean, because there's a lot of confusion. I mean, for example, the stuff inside Kantar that was sold to Bain by WPP, or the Axiom stuff in IPG, or the Epsilon stuff in Publicis, is not first-party data. It is third-party data, and therefore becomes less useful, to put it mildly, as a result of what we saw yesterday. And I think it's going to drive our clients back to using their first-party data, which is critical, and pooling it. That's where we see the big growth. And the walled gardens, as one of our clients said, one of the biggest packaged goods companies, guy who runs the media, said to me yesterday, this drives us back to first-party data, and there will be 25 walled gardens. I mean, that's what's going to happen. So
which talks to your fragmentation point, I suppose.
Yeah.
Martin, what about the regulatory challenge? I mean, I'm interested in, the other week with the skirmish with Facebook in Australia. Are we going to see anything that looks like a breakup of any of these platforms, or would you just not bet against them?
Well, I think what Google did yesterday on privacy was acknowledging that there would be further, that Google at one stage threatened to pull search in Australia, but then came to an agreement with News Corp on a global basis. So you see those walled gardens being established, and the relationship with the media being established in that microcosm. Facebook threatened to withdraw their news investment in Australia too. My own view, for what it's worth, is that you're going to see a bifurcation. I think it will be very difficult for Google, Facebook, Amazon in particular to make big deals. A double-click deal, an Instagram deal is probably off the table, in the US, that the regulators will not permit these companies, as they are currently structured, to become even more powerful on a big acquisition basis. So they will have to grow organically. So that's one thing. I think it's unlikely they'll be broken up. But if they are broken up, even the big proponents of it, Scott Galloway, for example, says, break up Amazon, but he does admit that AWS, the cloud services business, would probably become bigger than Amazon is today on its own. So if you jog back to the regulatory overhaul at Microsoft, look what's happened. I mean, under brilliant leadership of Satya Nadella, but look what's happened. It's mushroomed and flowered. It's a $1 trillion+ company and one of the big leaders. So net, I think there will be more regulation, but it will be in relation to takeovers. If you go back to Congress and the sessions that Bezos did and Zuckerberg did with Congress, there was some pretty embarrassing stuff around what they'd done on acquisitions. You remember there was actual email between Zuckerberg and his direct reports on one of the acquisitions they were
A
negotiating.
smoking email.
Yeah, and then there was with Bezos, it was different. He didn't write to well, there was an exchange with his direct reports, but it was between the direct reports. I think that was pretty embarrassing stuff. And I think that will encourage the regulators, DOJ, FTC, whoever it is, to limit their growth from acquisition. But otherwise, GDPR didn't reduce the power of the platforms. It just made them more powerful because the small and medium-sized companies just said, we can't deal with the bureaucracy and the cost of this. We're going to compete.
I'm conscious of the time, Martin. I want to just switch on to politics just a little bit. Your view on the Abraham Accords, what does that do for trade and the balance of power in the region?
Well, in isolation, one must admit that the President Trump and Jared Kushner did a good job. I mean, to get those sorts of agreements in the region was, an outstanding achievement. Whether it deserves a Nobel Prize or not for either or both is another question. So I think that's to be welcomed. On the other hand, we have seen developments in the region recently which give cause for concern. And I think whilst the Abraham Accord was definitely, in my view, I mean, even people, liberal columnists and commentators were effusive with their praise. I mean, nobody, I think, thought, not nobody, very few people thought that President Trump and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, would be able to make the progress they did, and they did. I mean, one has to admit it was an extraordinary achievement. Having said that, I think the Biden administration takes a slightly different view, to put it mildly. And, for example, the Biden's attitude towards Saudi Arabia and recent developments in Saudi Arabia obviously bring that into question. So some of the progress that the Abraham Accords seem to give us, I mean, the Palestinian question has been shunted to one side by the Abraham Accords, which troubles a lot of people. That problem still has to be solved. But I think now with the Biden administration, we have a slightly different approach. I mean, Biden has said that, he will deal with the king or implied he will deal with the king in Saudi Arabia, not with MBS. So, there are tensions there. And of course, it's a very difficult situation because if you rupture relationships with Saudi Arabia, where does Saudi Arabia turn to? Do they turn more to the Chinese and the Russians? Is that good from a political and security point of view? So I think there are huge issues now that still have to be resolved. So, A+ for the Abraham Accords, but maybe, that's already starting. The other thing that happened that is quite extraordinary that there's not a lot of airtime to is that, Saudi have made it clear that if you wish to deal with the Saudi government, you have to establish a regional headquarters in the region, in Riyadh, in Saudi. So, that came out too. So we are seeing some conflicting signals in relation to the region.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so this may be the last question, Oren, from David Lander. He's curious about your view on ESG. We've got to reboot the economy. Should we be rebooting it with an ESG, a green tinge backbone, if you like?
Actually, James, I think that we talked about something that is very important, and I want to answer that, actually, the regulator, because people, for the previous question, what is the regulator job? And people forget about it. Regulator job is to look at us, people, and what is right for us, putting aside a company, putting aside every single other interest, and looking at what is the right thing for us. And unfortunately, they're not doing a very good job. Now think about the road systems in the UK, in Israel. Obviously, this is regulated, and this is a platform to create innovation because people can run business. And if UPS or DHL will own the roads, obviously they will lack innovation. Or think about electricity companies. So this is an infrastructure and a platform that allow innovation, and people use electricity to build innovation. Now, I think that the regulators need to think about what is a platform, or what are players on top of the platform, to make sure that there is room for innovation to give good service. Now, if you think about our kids, grandkids, what will allow them to think about how they can build great products to people, and what is the infrastructure and the platform that will allow them to do that? I think that this is a critical thing, and I think that this regulation, 10, 15 years ago in Microsoft, allowed Google to grow and allowed Apple to build great products, and this is why we have great services and products. And I think that this is not happening, and because of that, companies are trying to verticalize their platform, make sure that they control the platform. And this is why companies like Google have to have an operating system. They have to have their app store. They have to have a browser, because if not, if it belongs to someone else, they can pull the plug, and Google cannot accept that. So regulators are great thing for users, and are great things for companies, because they can focus on the things that they need to do, not only to protect their own business, because someone can put the plug on them. So think about electricity. If someone can put the plug on electricity or road systems and stuff like that, things that we know that are infrastructures and platforms. And I think that this is something that we need to focus on. Another thing, James, I think that this is really important. I have one minute, but then I want to take it. I think that regulators need to think about what is important beyond privacy. Think about safety. Think about kids in the internet. You know how many kids are losing their lives because of bullying, because of they taking their lives, because what's happening on the internet, and who is talking about that, and who is doing anything about that? We talk about privacy, but you know what? Not many people could because of privacy, but the more kids in the US are losing their lives because of the internet and because of lack of protecting themselves. And I think that we as adults and business owners and leaders need to make sure that the kids are safe. Yeah. And this is not happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oren, it's a very important point. I'm afraid I've got to pull the plug on all of us though now. So thank you so much for a really good conversation, Sir Martin and Oren, and hand back over to you, Danny.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So UK-Israel Business' recent merger with the Anglo-Israel Association, the AIA, has enabled us to partner with an increasingly wide section of leaders like Sir Martin and Oren, who are at the forefront of their fields, creating the solutions we have and the breakthroughs we need. We recognize that success increasingly requires cross-sector collaborations. As an organization, we focus on bringing together government, academia, and business networks, supporting companies' growth and their impact. We meet online every week with multinationals looking to source the latest innovation and technology from Israel, and work with incredibly talented Israeli entrepreneurs who are looking to enter the UK market. A couple of weeks ago, we proudly launched our latest health tech initiative in collaboration with the UK Parliament and the House of Lords. This aims to bring the very latest innovations from Israel to the NHS. And we've also brought the world-beating vaccine program, the leaders of that, to this forum. And they've shared their insights in real time with those leading the fight against COVID here in the UK. Furthermore, we've been working closely with those who sought to bring about, which Martin spoke about, Sir Martin spoke about, the Abraham Accords between Israel, the UAE and Bahrain. I believe there's never been so much interest in working more closely together in so many areas. We're very grateful to Sir Martin for his continued support of UK-Israel business over the years in helping us to strengthen the ties between business in the two countries. I'm also very appreciative of Oren and AppsFlyer's support, and we look forward to doing a lot more together in the future to help other entrepreneurs build their unicorn business and build the next Israeli unicorn. Thank you both for sharing your fascinating insights into how you're making sense for us of this complex world. I must also thank James, Dor Pashavsky and David Lander, without whom today would not have been possible. Please don't miss the next in our series of 7 events, as detailed on LinkedIn. next week on March the 11th, which promises to be another fascinating conversation between the former BP chairman, Lord Brown, and Winwood CEO, Ami Danielle. Until then, stay safe and well. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you then. And thanks again to Sir Martin and Oren. Thank you.
Hi, Martin. Good chat. Hi, James.
Thank you very much.